to Aquarian Light. Today's episode is called Divine Freedom. There are many people in spiritual studies of a variety of natures, and we see that the commonality across all of these studies and practices is that what people are truly seeking is to be free. And in order to have this conversation, we need to clarify what we mean by freedom. And then we can talk about what happens along the way, along the path to liberation. Do you have any thoughts on what freedom means?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what we've spoken about before, um, mission and purpose, right? Um, in today's day and age, I think a lot of people like to get hung up on mission. The ego likes mission, right? And everybody walks their own individual path and yada yada. I'm so special. No one can tell me what to do, and I know better than everyone else. I'm doing it right, not the being, not the divine connection, because I'm asleep. I don't have a divine connection. So there's a lot of that going on, right? And then you know that differs from purpose, right? And purpose is the same within all of us. Purpose is to awaken and to help as many others find their way to awakening, as long as they want it, right? Of course, you can't. We're not to go out of the street and proselytize like a Jehovah's Witness. Like, although it would be funny, you just walk up to people on the street and you shake them and say, "Hey, you, awaken consciousness." If it only was so easy. Um, but that is purpose. That's the divine purpose, and mission is that expression, right? Of how we uniquely express that. So for our being, what we've been sent here to do, that allows our being to walk the path internally. Now we've spoken about that before, right? You know, everybody's stuck in duality, sees things dualistically, so it has to be one or the other, and the ego always loves to pull towards that. There's many paths, and if you say something I don't like, that's just because my path is different than yours, and that's not necessarily exactly true. It is sort of, but it's not, and also just like it wouldn't be true if somebody was like really just like militant and was like there's really only one true path that you have to like meditate and go to the unity and everybody else is wrong, right? That's also too extreme in the other way. But the truth is multidimensional, as it always is, right? And that truth is that there's both many paths and there is only one path, right? But like I said, people tend to, in the spiritual community, migrate towards the pole of this special, unique individualness, which is exactly what is keeping us tuned here, right? It's whether it's you know the false personality or the psychological profile or one of these things that we look at, right? That the third dimensional consciousness, right? That's New Age, what it says to move forward, right? And to buck the programming from the matrix, per se, right? Is the first step before we can actually do any work. If we haven't unplugged from the matrix, if we haven't killed the false personality, disidentified from our psychological profile, then we can't see illusion. And if you can't see illusion, then you can't do the work. And truthfully, really, once you unplug and you see through that illusion and you don't identify with anything, right? That's when you realize that we're all walking the same path, right? That's purpose. You connect to the divine purpose. Before that, yeah, there's many missions, and most of them, if they're legitimate towards the path of ascension, right, lead us. If they're actually leading you towards awakened consciousness, they all lead you to the same point. And then once you're at that point, really, then the rest of it doesn't really matter. It's like like for example, we are Gnostic instructors, but I mean, I don't consider myself a Gnostic, or you know, it doesn't matter once you're free, once you've freed yourself from pain and suffering, you've freed yourself from the construct, right? Then it doesn't matter if you started out as a Gnostic or a Theosophist, a New Age spiritualist. I know many others who found their way here in a different path, or maybe they were Buddhist. Gnosis for us feels the most concise in being able to help others. It's the most concise and practical with the least amount of, hazy uh hazy dogma, hazy symbolism, right? But truly, you're just trying to get to that same point. It doesn't matter. Some people shoot. Some people, luckily, in this time frame, they're lucky enough to have a spontaneous awakening, and they're just popping. They didn't do any work, but they already have unplugged. That's been
Maybe
going
they did
on.
work in a past life.
Yeah, sure, certainly,
Mm.
right? They're probably on the spiral path or something of that nature. So they just have to be activated, do whatever, be a point of light, and then go back to being an alien or something like that. But that's once you were at that point, right? Then there's all the same, right? We're all the same. I mean, at that point, one, you're connected to that divine purpose, and then the work becomes the same, which the work is that universal thread that's within everything that we always talk about, right? All of a sudden, it doesn't matter about the dogma of whatever path, right, that I took to get here. They all have the same root and the same essence, which is, to self-remember, like remember you're actually this divine being that's in this body, and not you're not the person, the meat suit, right? And then to work with the three factors, right? And that's and this is even if you're a spiral pather, you're not trying to kill all the ego, right? I mean, they'll say tame the ego, right? Well, in a sense, right, taming the ego still involves ego death. It just means they're only doing a little bit of the work before they go continue on the spiral path. But it's still, in essence, right? Oh, I'm getting rid of the bad traits I don't like and keeping the ones I like. Well, so that means you're killing some of the egos. It's really just at that point semantics, right? Are we talking about the ego as an entire entity, or the actual multiple psychological defects that we have? Because even in taming the ego, we're killing these other defects that we find unfavorable that we're meant to kill in a smaller dose because we're on the spiral path, right? So it really brings us around to, it's imperative really to get to that freedom from the construct where, before that there's rules and dogmas and all these things that are designed, these tools and things to help us, and then you transcend all of that. None of it really matters because you're listening to your being. And that's true freedom, right? Because then it's like, all right, I see this person, this ego, this false me, right? And it's still there. I'm not even talking about mastery or anything of that nature, right? There's, you know, you can achieve this comprehension pretty early in the work. You it's not, some big secret. It just takes really like facing ourselves and balancing our energy, and you know, doing the stuff that we don't want to do, right? But going into that and facing ourselves, and just, sitting in our own, filth, or whatever you want to call it, and until we feel that and deal with that pain and that trauma, and then we realize we disidentify, where they realize it's not us. It's there. It still has to be then through the actual work. Now that we can do the work and see that it's not us, eventually it has to be removed completely, so we're not triggered on these types of things anymore. But we do have to face ourselves, though, to even, stop thinking that we are this machine, and actually seeing that there's these mechanical impulses within us that are separate from our consciousness. But
I remember one time I was talking to a friend, and we were talking about these particular Buddhist books, and she said that she was really interested in them. So I thought, oh, let me get her some copies of these particular titles. And I knew I had gotten them from a monastery that I went to stay at for a meditation retreat. And this monastery was a few hours away. So I planned one weekend to go visit the monastery and to get these books for my friend. And it was going to be a several-hour drive. So I got up early, and then I started the drive, and I went there and I got these books. And of course, when you go to a Buddhist monastery, there's an understanding that they don't have any income or way to get food. So you would bring some food. So I brought a box of food, and the monk was really happy. And then I attended their Dhamma talk and the meditation, and then I left. And then the monk emailed me, and she said, oh, I was wondering why you got up early on a Sunday morning to come to the monastery. And I thought, you must be in so much pain. And I just want you to know that it's okay. Just keep meditating, hang in there. And it was a funny email because I was just going to get some books for my friend. but it highlighted this important part of the journey. The first part, a lot of people come into some kind of an orientation that seeks the higher dimensions because they're fed up with life and their internal state and pain. For example, they're in a lot of pain and they want to overcome it. They want to find a way to deal with it. So this leads them to first contact some kind of spiritual practices, and they begin meditation. They begin bringing their awareness to their heart center, sitting with those big and difficult emotions. And then they come to a certain baseline. And that was certainly the place where I was when she emailed me, and I had a chuckle because I wasn't in pain. I was fine. I was just going about my normal business, right? But even though maybe we're not spending our evenings crying and drinking wine, we reach a baseline where we're happy, we're functional, we have these spiritual practices, and it's very easy to fall into a new kind of sleep at that stage. So you maybe have some friends that are also in spirituality. Maybe you're in a, say, a yoga community or a meditation community, a Buddhist community, like you mentioned, and the safety and the energy in the space that this kind of a community can create, it can all feel very peaceful, very nice, and it can help you to ground yourself or to come back into balance. So your energy is balanced, but you are still not at liberation at that point. Why is that? And what is that?
Well, the thing is really, right, that we can't free ourselves from the construct without, like I said, defeating that other aspect of ourselves, or facing ourselves, facing that, I guess, main, like I said, the psychological profile, that main ego that entombs us here, right? And it is a false sense of self, right? Like a false personality. It's who we believe we are to be while we are asleep. It's the false I, right? Um, just because we started doing spiritual practices, just because we found ourselves a spiritual community, and we, reprogrammed ourselves from, maybe being somebody who goes out and parties at clubs and drinks all the time, and now we reprogram ourselves to somebody who is really diligent at meditating, and I'm really nice and let people say whatever they want, and I think I'm so now in control of myself because I've identified with spiritual egos or whatever that nature. It's still, it's like, I did this, I. Well, if you're still attached to the I, then you're not actually doing any work, because to see the ego, we have to see the illusion of it, right? So if we're actually going to remove these defects from our brain, we need to see both sides of it and see it as the actual entity that it is, that is entombing a piece of our consciousness, right? Otherwise, all we're doing is shifting from like one entity to another, right? Or one pole to the other, right? You know, we suppress this, and so the opposite comes out. It's the whole aspect of like good and evil is subjective, but it's all really ego, right? What we think is righteous, somebody else thinks is bad. What somebody else thinks is bad, somebody else thinks is righteous, right? That's why you have people that are, for example, Satanists. In their mind, they're doing stuff for their ego to get power, but for them it's cool because that's the way the world works, and whatever rationalization they have, right? So it's always a certain perspective, what's the right thing to do and what's not to do, and what really you're not doing is you're just still mechanical and not listening to your inner divinity, because the truth is when we do things consciously, it doesn't have to necessarily please everybody, or sometimes it does, and it could be subjectively good, subjectively bad, but the point is, when it's within consciousness, that's what we're looking for, to not be doing things mechanically and to do things because we're following our intuition. And really, it doesn't matter if you're free. It doesn't matter what reaction you get, what people think about you, what people say. We can't really tell others what to do with their work, and they certainly shouldn't be telling us what to do with our work either, because as soon as we point our finger at somebody else and we say like, oh, for example, you you are in pride because whatever, I'm upset with you and you make me feel small or inferior or whatever, you questioned me on something that I don't feel like I want to be questioned on, so you're in pride, you're asleep in whatever, you're out of control. As soon as we say somebody else, and this, and by the way, this could be whether this is somebody at the beginning or even someone with a lot of experience, right? We all can fall susceptible to being identified with something. But as soon as we're pointing out something in someone else, in a sense, we're identified with that, because nearly always, right? Unless we're, say, asked, or I could say maybe in a rare exception, I don't know, if you're karmically linked to somebody, maybe through like a being, you may be told, and I know we have this kind of connection between us and some others that we know, you might be told to pass on information to someone, whether that's in a relationship or somebody's in like your soul family. And even then, you can't really force it. You can maybe be like, hey, I have something to tell you. And then if they get mad at you because they say they're at a lower level or something and they're in pride, then you just don't tell them, because it wouldn't matter anyway. If you try to tell someone or convince someone of something while they're in ego, it's not going to work.
You still need their permission, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
couldn't just
So there's
say,
literally no
here's the
way.
message. You
Yeah,
have to get their permission and then see if they're open to that.
right. But it's just really funny because if like when, say, we're we're compelled to do something internally, right? And you come out and say something and you get accused of all these things, right? Say you get accused of being in conscious loss because maybe somebody, people don't understand you or something. And it could be like, just, I don't know, let's say you're typing out a keyboard, so everybody just assumes you're angry. You're at home chilling, smiling, and whatever. But everybody thinks you're really mad and you lost control or something. And it's funny because you'll get, say, I'll use a recent example, but like let's say you'll get an intuition to say something and just to speak out. You don't really want to, you know it's gonna be taken bad, but you're ready, so whatever, you do it anyway. And you say some things, and then after that, right, you get even another thing from your inner source, and it's like, oh, it's gonna be reacted to poorly, and that's okay, you still did the right thing, just don't let it get to you. And then like, all right, so all that happens, and the thing is, it's funny, you'll be blasted by people, whether they're like a mentor to you that is like ahead of you the path, or definitely a lot of people that are lower. All these people, everybody knows what's going on with you and wants to teach you a lesson. And the funny thing is, right, is you are getting a lesson because you already know what the lesson is. Like the construct told you what the lesson was, and it's not the lesson everybody else thinks they are. If anything, they're the ones that lost themselves, and it's almost like amusing, right? And even that might be an ego. Although I will say sometimes the amusing part, the amusing part with the construct, I think maybe a more subtle eye type of thing that comes from higher up. Uh, we talk about how our beings also have like these logoic personalities, and that's why some masters are very serious and some are very silly. Like you think of a Eckhart Tolle, right, or Gurdjieff, they have like this like silly aspect to them. But then you think of like Master Samael, right, or you know, he's very, very strict. So, and that was just based on their ray. So my intuition tells me that might be something else. But anyway, the things come along, and I'm just
You're
just
more of a playful person,
yeah, but just a flash
but
of
higher up.
something going on with my work, which is why it's so funny. So this is like what's really going on. It's like, one, it's like we're welcoming the situation. Like you're aware it's going to happen before it happens, and you're going into it consciously, right? Everybody else thinks you're lost, and you like know you're going to get slammed on it, right? And then the first thing we notice is, okay, everybody is still hitting me on pride. So that's my PPP. I was like, it's going to trigger other people, but first things first is the like communication and stuff. My person's not very polished, for example, right? So it's like, all right, well, I'm still not conveying the message, right? But the real big thing, and the real thing that the test is on, right? And this is where you have to be grateful. Oh, the construct brought me it again, so now I'm gonna be a little better at it this time, right? But the real thing is I have a big thing with not feeling heard, right? So you get put in this situation, and it's like, like you're not going to be heard well. I mean, I've had this happen a few times. There was one time I had to speak up, I think, in a theosophical meeting, same thing, and it's just like, nobody's going to understand you, and it's like, that's like part of it, right? I'm going to say this, everybody's going to get mad at me, they don't understand what I'm saying, they don't understand where I'm coming from, And like I'm meant to just sit there with it, not react. And the thing is like when you're disidentified, it's not like you don't feel, but you don't get mad or react. So you just have to sit there with it. And then it's like, oh, thank you. Cause now all those things still get triggered. So you can hit them a little more. These are things, by the way, we're talking about like your main egos. So the stuff that's going to be with you for the whole work until you're done with the work. So all these like confrontations and all these things, like for me, it's like, oh, you should welcome that because it's a chance for you to do more work on yourself, even if everybody else is just going to not do work on themselves or not look at that. But
Well,
it is
also we couldn't assume that they are also not working on themselves.
that's
Like
true
some
too. I
people
mean,
can be in a conflict and
in
do
a
the work.
sense, right? And it really doesn't matter, right? But let's say not the uncountry. Let's say it's somebody that's actually further along with you on the path, so they're like more connected to their being. Then there's it gets shady. First of all, this is my comprehension of that level does not exist, but there is the aspect of right. They're talking their being. So like I know for a fact that my being set this up as a test for me. Who's to say that maybe what I said? First of all, it doesn't even matter if what I said is right or wrong, right? Because it doesn't matter. The test is for me to just have to sit there with this uncomfortability. But it's like maybe what I said was right, maybe it wasn't. Who knows, right? Maybe I triggered something, maybe I didn't. Who knows? It could also just be like, oh, because they're actually connected to their being. It's just like, oh, well, this person's getting tested on this. So I'm going to say these things to give them exactly what they need, which is what I needed to be triggered on that thing. So, it doesn't even matter. The funny thing is that here it is. Like, this is the construct giving me a test and I know what's happening. And then, like, everyone else in there is going to be stuck in this kind of like mechanical thing. There's this weird thing that happens in spiritual communities. I think that it's like, oh, well, to have compassion means that we have to basically be doormats and never say anything and just let others make us feel uncomfortable. And there's, at least from my understanding, and this is from internally speaking, so this is what I've gotten from it being, is that compassion, right, is there's two poles to it, right? Everything has duality. It's like mercy and justice, right? So, you know, I mean, in certain times, yeah, you have to, especially let's say like you're around people that are just ignorant, like your family or something, you meet them at their level. But then there's also other times, where there's maybe people are intentionally trying to cause harm to others and stuff. And there's the old proverb, I think it's in the Quran, I believe it is, but it's like, you're nonviolent and somebody comes to murder your family and you don't protect them, you're not violent. Well, you still get bad karma for that. But whatever. That is
Well,
just
if I could say something on the topic of speech, speaking up, and well, everything that you're talking about, like being understood or having things not land the way you intended, it's a very beautiful journey to go through the lessons associated with the throat chakra and the heart chakra and how we tune these centers. Uh, Always when you're dealing with group dynamics, the ego of pride is a big one that will be triggered and needs to be worked with in these scenarios. So let's say you have a group of people and there's a conversation going a certain way, and to become involved, to choose to become involved in a situation, the energies will move in a certain way that look different for everyone. But what we mean when we say to be conscious, it means that you can observe the impulses arising and they do not come out mechanically because you can see that initial impulse and then you can, from an observer vantage point, consciously decide what that means, how that's going to play out in this scenario, and make the decision. So I remember many years ago being in a meeting with colleagues, and there's always that one person that is like the pot stirrer that just can't help it. And they'll ask some off question or they'll make some weird comment. And eventually they either get fired or leave the department. But for, 18 months, this weird person comes in and they're a bit funny in meetings. And what that is it's an ego that has these things on the tip of the tongue. So that energy, the impulse arises, and someone who's observing consciously can see that that thing on the tip of the tongue that they just want to say, right? They just want to chime in, and there will be different reasons why. Sometimes the person is wanting to show what they know. Sometimes the person just loves watching the reactions and they eat popcorn, metaphorically eat popcorn. Sometimes they want attention or they're bored. There can be a whole range of different motivations for this person to suddenly chime in at a given moment. And we're talking unconsciously. But when someone is conscious, then there's a whole lot of factors that go into consideration. And then they make their move or interaction and involvement in a situation. But just because someone is aligned and they're delivering a message that comes from divinity or that is appropriate to deliver given the circumstances, that does not guarantee that the receivers are going to receive it in a wholesome way or that they're going to understand it. Like if you think of many Buddhist masters or even the Master Jesus, they would say some wise words and people wouldn't understand what they said, or they would take it to mean completely the opposite, or they would start arguing about it and say, I think it means this, or how could they say that? As one example, there was a time where a young girl was raised from the dead, one of the miracles of Jesus, and Jesus told a lie. He said, oh, she's only sleeping. And then people would say, what is he talking about? Because they didn't know what he was talking about. So it is not uncommon for a well placed or an appropriate message that is delivered to be completely misunderstood. So the lesson to be misunderstood is one kind of lesson, and the scenario of being misunderstood is something that even masters don't escape.
And I also think it's not necessarily important if we're understood or right or wrong, right? From an aspect of like being free from the contract or being free from all of this, whatever, this the whole idea of this like kumbaya thing and just allow others to abuse you because whatever that's compassion is it's not doesn't really make sense because it's like in a sense it's like well, we should turn our enemies into our friends. Well, I don't really think there are any enemies, right? What's it, a friend is somebody, I guess, who's vibrating at the same frequency as you right now and wants to talk to you. And an enemy is just, I guess, somebody who's not vibrating at the same frequency as you right now, and
But I
that's
don't
fine.
think there are enemies like
That's what I'm
even.
saying. I don't think like to me, I don't see anyone as an enemy. Everyone is just a piece. Like we're all part of this one multiple perfect unity. It's like whether we're vibrating frequency or not, nobody's an enemy. It's literally just me. That's me in whatever, an asleep ego, and then this person is me that also has a spiritual inquietude. I don't like it's like this to insinuate, because when we give messages, and a lot of times those who don't like what you say try to insinuate that you're like getting mad or like you can't handle criticism. It's like it doesn't. It's like if you're truly free, and this is important because like we try to explain what it's like to truly be outside of this like bubble, right? It's like criticism. It doesn't matter what somebody else or everybody else thinks of me, or you know what I mean. It's like I'm not even me. Like it's like it's like in essence the me that I am is you also. So you're criticizing me, you're criticizing yourself, and that's just some type of error because you're asleep in error that you're not seeing something in yourself and it's not your fault. It's like it's this idea that like just because we don't stroke the ego that it's like that means that we're being like mean or something. And like I said, it could look, everybody understands things differently, but sometimes it's like when it's an attack in that nature, and then we're talking about something that's like I said, again, not being ignorant, but like intentionally, like whatever, maybe they're walking the left-handed path or trying to stir things up and intentionally like ruin others' work and stuff like that. It's like, well, if somebody's like that trapped ego, somebody's like I don't know, Agent Smith or an NPC, an empty shell, we go on and on and on and on. But if someone's that asleep and they're literally attacking the people that are doing the work, it's like, well, one, it's like, all right, well, you can say that that's the wrong thing to do, and I suppose it could cause them some type of cognitive dissonance, but like they're already in their pain and suffering. Their being has decided to kind of sacrifice them to being consumed by ego. and not really matter if you say something or not, they're still going to be within pain and suffering. What happens though, and this is my understanding, is if you stroke that ego, so therefore you placate it, then because it's already consumed its host, or it's constantly consuming its host, it comes out and tries to attack everyone else. So at that point, it's like, well, there's not like, it's not even like, oh, I dislike that essence, or no, the essence is me. And it's like, you could say there your enemies are criticizing you, and you're just sitting there with open heart chakra, sending out love. You get the little dissonance that comes through the challenge, and you meditate for the next day, and you're just beaming love out to everybody, right? And but everybody thinks that you're actually upset, and it is what it is. But that's what it's like. It's the reality of what everyone else is seeing is so not there. And then you know we try to help and teach this more over than anything else, right? Because obviously the most important part of the work is the death, and that is what the work talks about, right? We talk about the death, the death, the death. But you can't do the death if you're not free. And it's there in the doctrine too, right? It's the same universal threads, but it can be sort of lost in translation. I think the one school that maybe actually says it best is New Age, right? New Age talks about what you need to unplug is that the balancing of the energies and to face your trauma. It has it, right? But New Age usually talks about integrating the ego and stuff, so like it messes that up. And then we're Gnostic instructors, and the terminology, it's there too, right, to kill the false personality, because it gets confusing, because then there's also the authentic personality, and then do the personality that stays with you, and then people don't know what it means. Or I think in the later, some other organizations will use like some of the later terminology like PPP, PPE. That also confuses people because there's so many letters. um
But
but
just for someone who doesn't know, we should say PPP stands for Principal Psychological Profile,
yeah,
and it's specifically referring to the main trunk of the tree with regards to the egoic structure. So let's
yeah, I
say
think I
if
think the
you're
easiest way for
mm,
most of the, like, since these viewers aren't necessarily 100% Gnostic, I think the easiest and most common term would be the like New Age term, which is awakening to your fifth dimensional consciousness. Although it's actually your sixth dimensional consciousness. It's actually pretty easy to awaken your fifth dimensional awareness. Some people might have it awakened already. If you could like say, we're able to lucid dream as a child or astral project, that's the fifth dimension. But it's referred to as a fifth dimensional consciousness because what the next root race on the planet will be. But actually unplugging is actually getting past that. We've talked about that in the Matrix episode, where it's like you awaken from the 3D to the 5D, but you're still within the Matrix, like Neo using his powers in the machine world. And it's not until you actually go back all the way to the source of that, and then that's when you actually destroy the Matrix. You balance yourself, right? When you let Smith absorb him, and he stops fighting back. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's that's literally what it is, right? Like to be free, it's to transcend the rules, the dogma, the tools, the social concepts, not being beholden to all of these things, even things like family, all of these things. And not to say like to sound bad or I guess like cold or something, but there is this aspect. It's being attached to that universal divine love. It's like everybody's always chasing love, but it's actual love, where it's like everyone, like I said, everyone is me. You know, it's like, sure, if someone is set there to be challenged, you have to say something. You say something, but you don't take anything personal. You're not mad at anybody. There's this idea that you're flustered or angry, or it's not what's going on. But also, I don't know. I gave a story about
well,
depth of work. Perhaps you have one for us too.
um, maybe we'll get to that, but I also wanted to add that someone hearing this who maybe they have their own spiritual practices and they've never heard anyone talk about disidentifying or breaking free from the construct. Either they're going to say, "Oh, that's impossible. I can't do that," or they're going to say, "Okay, great. How do I do that?" And so if they're interested to come into this place of freedom, we're talking about divine freedom, then maybe they will start to intellectually make this change. Because you talked about, oh, uh, with your family, for example, don't be attached to your family. Non-attachment is something that is taught in Buddhism and is a very foundational teaching in this tradition. And to mechanically or intellectually try to achieve these states will put one through a lot of heartache because it's not genuine. It's coming through what could be described as an overexertion of will to try to manifest a concept. So the idea is there, the concept is pointing towards the reality, but it is not the reality itself. So, as an example, someone who says, I want to break free from the construct, like Ruth and Adonis said, so let me go and block all of my family members and I won't talk to them anymore. And now I'm free because they're really annoying and I don't like my aunt, for example. Now, that's not what we mean because this is an energetic and free state. And when the consciousness is awake and functioning, there is never any predictability to any of it. So there's not going to be any way you could have a tradition or rules or say, oh, you always wouldn't talk to your family, or you would talk to your family, or you would do this for your children, or do that, or you would say things in a certain way, as you said, to appease people's egos. There is no guarantee that it would be one way or another. Masters have been described to be unpredictable, and that's because the consciousness is acting and deciding in the moment without any program to rely on. And the decision taken by that essence may not conform to someone's moral ideas. As an example, Buddha supposedly abandoned his family, his wife, and his children, and he went out seeking enlightenment. And a lot of people who first hear this story say, well, that's not liberation. That's just being irresponsible. He left his family alone and he didn't take care of them. Of course, that's because the people that make this kind of a judgment, first of all, they don't know that this is a construct, and there's many factors that are not understood. And of course, I think Buddha's wife and children would have been just fine. They came from a wealthy family. And when someone takes a certain action, it's so easy from the outside to have all of these opinions based on our own programming, what they should and shouldn't do, not realizing that even these judgments and this assessment of what we think someone should do can come from more dogma, more programming, more expectations that don't really see the full picture. And until we have 100% awakened consciousness, we don't see the full picture. We still see from our point of view. And there are many who, maybe in either esoteric studies or in spiritual schools, different kinds of traditions, that have come to a certain place of freedom. They've come to a certain place of awakening to a certain level. And there are certain egos, whether gross or subtle, that they have been able to dissolve to a certain level. But in a moment, they can still misperceive, as can any of us. In any one moment, we can fall asleep again, or as I like to say, get sloppy. We just sort of don't pay attention and we don't perceive fully. And then we rely on something from the past, something that is not new, that is not in the moment, or we rely on what someone told us, someone else's perspective, their opinions. And when you can have 5, 10 people come and say certain things, then a particular picture could be painted that may not be true. I recall a certain family member was, I believe they were doing landscaping work. And this was a temp job. It wasn't some kind of vocation, and it wasn't an environment where they had a lot of people that they knew. It was just some random summer work. So this family member, they were a very upright and diligent person, and they had very strong character. So never mind that they were doing some landscaping summer job, they were still in the same character and doing everything very diligently, even though they were being paid probably minimum wage. And so the other workers didn't like that. They saw that this person was working very hard and getting a lot done, and that made them look bad. And they knew that then someone would come along and say, hey, well, how come you only moved 5 bags of soil and he's moved 10, for example? So because of that, they began to make up stories about this person to the boss and say, oh, he was absent, or he took a very long lunch break and he didn't come back. And they were saying all kinds of things that were not true. And what can happen in many circumstances is that the person who is falsely accused, if it has to do with a paid job, they could end up losing the paid job because of these people that were telling stories about them. And that was their own experience to go through. It can be a very valuable experience to face false accusation. And for those who are in esoteric studies, we know that that's a part of the growth of the soul, to experience false accusation, to experience people maybe gossiping or outright making up stories. And in one of these circumstances, because interestingly, there was probably some karma for this person, that it happened a few times. And in one of these instances, there was a jealous colleague that went around making horrible stories about them. But the people who had taken the chance to get to know this family member, they made their own assessment of them from their personal experience. And when these rumors came around, then they said, no, I don't think that's true, because you see, I also know them. And what you're telling me doesn't line up with with what I understand about this person and their character. So they paid some karma because this situation happened quite a few times. And then in the last instance that I heard about, their reputation of having an upright character actually was able to prevent the rumors from sticking. And then they continued working in that particular place. But this is someone who's not even in, say, any kind of spiritual studies. They were in a religious group and they had their own religious beliefs. They were very much under the programming of those religious beliefs, but character was important to them. And we saw that their soul still went through these kinds of tests. So when we're talking about the path to liberation, this is a step that can't be avoided. It can't be skipped, right? We need to have these experiences. And those who have a strong internal reservoir of stabilizing energy, shall we say, this internal fountain that they draw on that gives them vitality and strength, then these people are able to withstand those kinds of circumstances very well. That's just one, it's an interesting side piece to this whole conversation. But in my experience, these kinds of tests, they are set up by the construct to hit you where it hurts, right? So even if you've been playing this game for a while, right? Maybe you've been incarnated many times and gone through these kinds of experiences, and you reach a point where it's all very much a funny game and you just keep playing, and the soul keeps going through its lessons and learning, and at some point it all becomes quite funny and quite silly, and the construct will bring you some small tests that are so overt and obvious that you can have a laugh, you can have what is called the cosmic giggle in some places, or the Leela, it's play, and have fun with it. But as you continue with this spiral of lessons in higher and higher octaves, even though you know that you're the universe playing with itself, you know that everyone is you, the bigger challenges can be set up in a way that maybe the accusations or the judgment or people in a position where you admire them or you rely on them as a mentor, it can get closer and closer to home. And so, like you said, yes, you may not be identified with it, but you can still have feelings through that, right? Like someone that you are very close to and that you deeply care about, that you look up to, can then misunderstand you or judge you and make their assessment of you that they think the actions that you're taking they would recommend against. So from their point of view, they are maybe they're in a place where they don't say there's a right and a wrong, so they're not saying that it's wrong, but in a way they are because they're saying from my point of view, you shouldn't have done that. So there is some on one level there's some duality there from one perspective, but what we find is that as you continue on this journey and you continue to experience expansion, then you see that it's a big game of light and dark, right? The more you build up your light and you come to this place of almost like, oh, nothing can touch me, then the more you will have these certain characters or people come to you that get very angry at you or can't stand you, or people very, very close to you that you very much admire, then suddenly turn around and say, you shouldn't have done that, or I don't think you should do that. And it's interesting how this compounds, right? How it seems to happen on a bigger and bigger scale, that the light and darkness in this plane, they they have to grow together, right? Where there's greater light, there's greater darkness, or where there's greater darkness, there's greater light. So this is going to happen as we expand. And the challenge is to stay centered and to not give away your energy, right? To not get pulled back into the illusion and become identified with the game. So when, say, people come for your light, or they come towards you with accusations, and you can be tempted to be disoriented by these things or to be sucked up in, oh no, I didn't do that, whatever, getting defensive. You just continue to vibrate higher, and you're not really threatened by any of these things, even if attacks are coming from, say, family members, from friends, from mentors. It's like the shadow is everywhere, right? And it tries to come in through all these different avenues. And maybe a long time ago in your path it came from strangers, that angry, grumpy uh bus driver, or someone on the side of the road. You're walking along and someone gets cross and says, look where you're walking. That was a very small scale type of test. And then as you carry on with this path, then those tests can get closer and closer to home. But really part of how we transcend it is the understanding, that understanding that comes from the heart, how we understand the whole universe. We know that these these essences that are playing this game with us in Leela, they're not evil, and they have their part to play. We can appreciate the the darkness that some of these essences have to hide in to make the whole construct work. And so, yes, we have this understanding, and we also know how to protect our own field, right? We stay centered and we continue to beam out love to everyone and continue to move towards a place of unity. It's actually very important when we talked about disidentification to explain uh, how someone might get there. I think we were talking about this before, but again, someone who is new, um, they may not understand, okay, how do I disidentify? And I wanted to share, for me, the key thing that helped me to make the switch was actually working with open awareness, because open awareness is a particular meditation practice that helps you to move the consciousness into the whole field itself. And I'm not saying this is the only method. Different people can use different methods, but For me, when I began practicing with the open awareness practice, the summary is that as you expand the consciousness through placing your awareness in the surrounding field, you begin to sense that everything, all of matter, including the physical body, are arising within this field. And once you know that in your heart and you see it experientially, then how can you be attached to the body or the stories or the egoic structures, because you can start to feel them as energies that arise inside the centers of the human machine, and you see that this physical form, it's not you. So while you can play and interact inside this physical form, you're not fooled that this is me. I like what Ram Dass says, where he talks about, you said meat suit, so I think he says something like it's like an astronaut suit, and he very much had that sense of that it's a suit that you wear. And he said sometimes one soul can meet another soul and say, "Are you in there? I'm in here." And he just sort of, it's very poignant. You can feel it energetically. You can feel it with those superior emotions. And once you click into that, you can't go back, right? You can see, oh, it's a meat suit. Okay, now I don't need to take anything so seriously. I don't have this need for people to understand me. I don't need to diminish my light because there are people who are still stuck in pain or darkness or accusations. Even if everyone is pointing the finger and misunderstanding me, I still know they're a part of me, that we're part of one big unity. So I don't need any kind of approval. I don't need love to come from an external source, because I am divine love and so are you. And I'm radiating that out to everyone. There's no need to be diminished or to feel low vibrational, or, it's just a place of perfect wholeness. And this is the divine freedom that we're talking about.
No, no, it's true. It's the biggest enemy, right, to the work is the sleeping consciousness, not the ego, right? Because if the conscious is sleeping, we don't see the ego. And that's the biggest problem. Like, yes, we need to do the ego death to awaken consciousness, but you have to not be sleeping. And it's just, yeah, it comes down to it. Like, it's a, and you've unplugged and you're at that free spot. It's almost like I mean, you obviously don't go seeking out confrontation because that would be egoic, right? But like when something comes along and the contract brings you something, and there's usually like I said, telegraphed if you're paying attention, right? Like it's coming, and it's just like, oh, this is great. It's like, here's all these people say these things and mind you, like I said, if they're saying it about you, and that means that you do still have it, right? We could be past the stage where we identify with something, but the things are still there, and that's why they notice it, right? It's just when you accuse somebody, you're just not noticing it, you're identifying with it. But like, okay, cool. So here's these things that I have to work on. Let's say like superiority or you know, not feeling heard and all that stuff. And it's just great, like because everybody's telling you not to look down on them or not be too prideful. It's like nobody's looking down on you. You're looking down on yourself. That's the issue, right? It's like I have that in me too. I'm not. You don't need to go out and like saying that about other people. What you're not doing is tilling your own field, right? Everybody wants to get mad and say that they're responsible for their own work when they don't like what you say, but then they're not doing any work. So it's like, okay, well, it's not for me to tell them either, but it's just you just welcome it and you do the work on yourself. Because like every time you have that conversation, like let's say, like I said, these are things that are going to be triggered on all the time. So every time this, let's say every 3 months, something like this comes around, well, then you can, you get a little bit better and not feeling so hurt. Well, I'm not hurt. You even, like you said, it gets to the point where it's like, ah, ha, ha, here's another point where they're not going to understand me. Now I can like, maybe finally get rid of that pesky ego. Probably not this time either, but like, what I mean? You get rid of it a little bit more. And that's how we grow, right? And then hopefully your communication gets better, your speech gets better, all of these things improve because you've been put in that situation where you get triggered, and then you can take that into meditation, right? And then you can work on it. So it's not like it's a bad thing or you're upset at all. But it can be amusing. And we really, I don't know, I know for us, at least the way we teach, and I get this internally a lot, that there's just, there's everybody has their own style, and maybe, some things to seem harsh or something, but it really is, it's just, you know, there's plenty of people already out there that are following these like dogmatic routes and stuff, and whatever, to resonate with whatever egos people have, for the religious people or the people that like Buddhism or like that. There's enough teachers doing all that, and I've always had internally this like, just, I don't know, there's not a lot of time just to be overt, before I ever was into the esotericism, before it was brought to me. I work in music, and even way back, like my motivation with music, I love uplifting music, like uplifting dance music, and it was never about like, oh, I want to be like rich and famous or whatever. It's just like, no, I just want to play uplifting music, and I just have like so much love to give, and I just want to just give it and just be overt with it, and like everything of the music is just like love, 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 love. That's what I felt like. It's just like giant light point. And at that point in time, because I was unconscious, and unconscious me dealing with these issues was very much like, I didn't really like people, so I loved performance, because it was like, oh, I'm gonna beam this to you and then also not interact with you, which obviously has changed from, growth. Now you understand where people come from, but I had that was like my main thing, like, understand other people. It's like I just want to share my love with them from as far away as possible. But in a sense, it's the same thing, right? And that was that authenticity still shining through when I was unconscious. And then, but it turns around into the teaching method too. It's like, look, people can have their egos coddled and sit in a wheel, and that's okay. And it's not, like I said, we're not looking out and stirring for an argument or whatever, but it's just like, I very feel much like, they're like, here's this truth, and it's like here, like, this is how you awake the consciousness. And I'm just gonna say that if you don't like it, that's fine. I'm not gonna try to convince you. I'm not trying to like do whatever, just say like, this is this. If you want help with that, I'll try to help you with it. If you don't, then that's fine. But I'm not gonna say like, oh, well, maybe that too. Like, no, that doesn't work. And it's not like I don't know. It's just a flavor, or like whatever, how it feels like
Nothing
from
personal.
nothing personal. It's like, I don't. It's just like, yeah. It's to me, it's like, if we're trying to save as many people as possible, right? Then all the other stuff is great, and all the like whatever, the dog, whatever, but like none of that really matters. All you just get to hear. You get to hear, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter if you start out, what school you start out with, what practices you do, what your personal opinions are, and all these things. Like, walk whatever path you want. You want to go be a monk in a Buddhist temple somewhere, but you're still practicing those like three factors and self-remembering, and then you get to that break point, It doesn't matter the how you got there, right? Because once you're there, then you'll move on to wherever you need to move on to, be that the spiral path, be that whatever, to be a prophet, whatever your mission is, right? You'll be in touch with your divinity. Then you're listening to your divinity. That's all I'm trying to do, is just like, this is how you help people. Like, did you want to know how to listen to your inner divinity? This is how you do it. And then at that point, then you don't need any of those roles, or you don't need to do any of those tools, or none of that matters. It's all semantics, because you're still not listening, to try to help you to get to the point where you're listening. And once you're listening, people ask, it's like, how do you know? It's like, you'll know. It's just like, and you were mentioning it being like, intellectually, it's not intellectual. There's not really anything like, you don't need to read any books. You don't really, I mean, like, the basic practice is very simple, right? And then in a sense, it's just like, I mean, you said for yourself, you use a specific type of practice. For me, really, it was just like, I hit a really rough spot, and came across the fact that you're supposed to do this to pop out of the construct. So I locked myself in a room and just meditate. And I didn't, at that time, I didn't even have like Gnostic meditation. There was just like literally like silent meditation. And I locked myself in a room for 2 weeks and just like focused on all of the terrible things that happened to me, and sat with them until it was like, that's not me. And then they're just like, oh, and it happened. And you know, that's my advice. Face yourself. And I don't even know, to be completely honest, it's like, I'm not sure if that, unless it happens to you spontaneously, I don't know if one can have the will to do it without being brought a painful event by their being. It might just be up to their being, but it's worth the shot to say, this is how you do it. And if somebody wants to, they can, and if they don't want to, they don't have to. It's, like I said, like you said, nothing personal. But like from my understanding, that's the only way to break away from that, is to, because it's our traumas and our fears and all those things. It's our fear of losing that like sense of self that holds us in the sense of self. So if we can't, face all our pains and traumas, and hey, listen, if you're having the spiritual inquietude, there's a very good chance that you've dealt with like child abuse, sexual abuse, and all these things. Everybody wants to say their story is so terrible, or a lot of us have a terrible story, and I'm not gonna get into my personal story because it doesn't matter. And everybody has their story, and then we face it, we disadvantage. Now that's not me. That all of that was designed to get me here, and now it's not me. It's like your life started when you break out. So, you know.
Well, it's still not you every moment.
Well, I mean,
That's
no,
the
look,
fun
we
part.
still have to, like, okay, when you just identify, it's not like, oh, now I'm a spiritual master. Like, we're far from being masters. Actually, at the very beginning, which is where I would say I'm at, right? Or you're probably a little ahead of me, maybe, because you've been in the practices longer. But I've like a year and a half from that moment, right? And it's like, you may have to self-remember like 1,000 times a day. Like even during this conversation, I sit here and listening to you, and you're just like, for a second, you have to be like, oh, I'm trailing off for a second. Just focusing on a breath, like be present, But that's how you're doing something right. I mean, if you know, at first, right, we teach methods like Key of Soul, and to help you be present, you mechanically check that in, and helps you maybe astral project because you mechanically program in these reality checks. But it shouldn't, if you're actually at that point, it shouldn't be like, oh, I did it 5 times a day because my phone alarm went off. What it becomes is you constantly know that you lost yourself in the ego. So it's like you lose count. It's just like literally, oh, every 5 seconds I have to be like, back. And that's normal. I'm assuming, yes, after a lot of work, maybe it'll not be that many times a day, but that's where it is for me. And that's fine. Like without claiming to be
Yeah,
that
there's all
dogma.
these instructions and methods, concepts. And because we are in the 3D and we're communicating, we use these to try to convey something that is not the concept, that is not the method. It's like a little boat that's going to take you across the river, and then you're going to throw away the boat and you're on the other side of the river. And that's what we are talking about by unplugging.
Yeah,
There is a
absolutely.
reality.
Whatever boat you want, just get to the other side. Get to the other side,
And
because
don't,
like I said, once you're on the other side, that's when your being starts taking initiation internally, and that part is the same for everyone, right? No matter what. And also at that point, then you could use whatever practices you want to, because really it's just your intentions. Once you're in control of setting your intentions, you want to do Buddhist practices, you want to go do the Hindi practices, it doesn't matter. It's like I said, it all is the same practice once you get to the point that you realize that really everything is all the same. And the only reason you don't see that it's all the same is because you're still not connected to that.
yes. So don't become dogmatic or religious about any of it,
Mhm.
whether your favorite tradition is Buddhism, or you like Vipassana, or you like Gnosis. That's just what it's called now. But when you're connected to that true internal authenticness, that divinity within, then it doesn't really care what you call it. And that's the goal, to get to that place. We talked about when we face, say, personal attacks or misunderstandings. And one word that I like to use to describe how we wrap divine love around all of this is encompassment, where we can, on the smaller scale, you learn to be with those emotions that need to come up for you to face your traumas and your the past from this incarnation or even from previous incarnations. People talk about clearing intergenerational karma, being the soul that incarnates to go through whole buildups of these energetic structures that are so old and have been passed on. This pain has been passed on from generation to generation, and to be the one that sits with all of it, that holds awareness and love in all of it, that can understand divinely, intuitively, that yes, even in this pain, in this darkness, there exists love, and to bring that love to that place. And then from a place of divine love, break through it, break through the illusory nature of reality, and to bring love even to the pain and darkness of the Maya and the forms on this plane. And then to come through that and to find groundedness, a centeredness, a place of unshakability, where you're just holding love, holding the vibration of love here at this plane, and to allow all of it, whether someone hates you or loves you, whether someone understands you or not, whether you have a group of people with you or you're alone. You're in a place of divine love, and that's freedom. And no one can touch that.
Well said. Well said.
I think this brings us to a natural ending point. It's been uh, it's been an inspiring conversation just to move through these ideas and to celebrate them, that these are the things that anyone who, if maybe right now you're suffering or you're in difficulty, be encouraged that as you reach towards the light and as you learn to find your feet in whatever practices are working for you, to become balanced, to become grounded and centered, and to be able to face the challenges both internally and externally, then you will begin to raise your frequency. And this is a gift that you share through your work with the collective. So that's a beautiful thing. And I encourage you to reach for that light and discover it within yourself. To all of our listeners, remember to be the light, be the change you want to see.
Yeah, and I just want to say one other thing too, because I mean, I said for me, like, right, I locked myself in a room for 2 weeks, and that's very intense. And sure, that works. But maybe, if you're working or, whatever it is, you might not have time to, meditate for like 2 weeks straight, depending on your life. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be like in 2 weeks. I think in Gnosis, the master said it takes about 3 years. But the important part is that you, and I guess that's for an average person, how they meditate, right? But the important part is that you just face yourself. Don't blame external things. Don't, you know, put it off for tomorrow, later. That's just the ego, right? If they're not in the present. If you're saying, I'm not going to deal with that. That's too much. I'm gonna do that tomorrow. Then you're not working, right? You just, as long as it takes you, every time you meditate, just sit there and face with your pain, and it sucks, but you do it, you know, and that's the only way to do it from how I know, like I said, and it takes willpower and all that, because it's very easy to just avoid that and pretend to be spiritual and butterflies and rainbows and, oh, I have bad dreams because I take this supplement, or, oh, like, oh, that person said something mean to me. They're in pride. So that means that, I don't have to listen to them because they said something I don't like. And then when somebody else says something that tells me the same thing, then it just goes over my head because it's all peaches and rainbows and they're my friend. It's like, no, that's not how it works. So just remember that we face ourselves, and then we can have true liberation, true freedom. And then you can do whatever you want, and you listen to your being, and it doesn't matter. Like, and also it doesn't matter what other people do when you're at that point. It's all love. We're all one. So love and light to everybody, and vibrate at a higher frequency, maximize dharma for the collective.